All right. Good afternoon. We are thrilled to be presenting a pretty timely webinar entitled Moving Forward, What the Workplace Looks Like for Disabled Lawyers Post-Pandemic, which is sponsored by the ABA Commission on Disability Rights and section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. And this panel is just one of many in a series of rapid response webinars. The ABA is actively planning additional programming on a variety of issues. So please visit americanbar.org/CRSJ for updates on those programs. During today's program, we encourage you to ask a lot of questions of our panelists through the Q&A, not the chat function. The chat function is not the best place for Q&A, so if you see the Q&A button to the right of the chat, please click that for questions. We hope to have an interactive discussion here, so we welcome all questions. If you don't see the controls for whatever reason, just make sure your screen isn't idle and they'll pop back up. We'll address all questions at the end of the program. We'll also be sharing a recording of this program to everyone who's registered, so you can see it or share it widely, rather, with your network. And with that, we're happy to bring you today's program entitled Moving Forward. As I said, what the workplace looks like for non-disabled or for disabled lawyers post-pandemic. So today, our panelists are myself, and I'll introduce myself. My name is Lindsey Callentine. I am the National Director of Legal Recruiting at Seyfarth Shaw. We also have Joanne Christopher. She is the Senior Human Resource Manager for Reed Smith. We have Anat Maytal, who's an associate with Baker Hostetler. And we have Calandra Johnson, who's an associate with Big Fire Law and Policy Group. And I will go ahead and let each of our panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Joanne. I'll go last since I've already been speaking. And Joanne, feel free to give us an introduction of yourself, what you do, and your background.
Sure. Welcome to everyone. We're delighted to be part of this discussion. I personally am the Senior Human Resources Manager at Reed Smith's Pittsburgh office. I am also the HR liaison to our disability-focused employee resources group. We call our employee resources groups business inclusion groups because we do think there is a business imperative for including not only people with disabilities, but all different types of diverse employees. I am also on the board of 2 organizations that support people with disabilities, and I have a son who has disabilities. Also, it's interesting that next year, Reed Smith is going to be celebrating 10 years of our disability business inclusion group. So quite a milestone, and we're looking forward to a lot of good stuff to come on that front. We are pleased to be recognized as a top employer for people with disabilities by the National Organization on Disability. We also are having a disability summit on December 2nd. You're all welcome to attend. You can check our social media accounts to register. If you can't find it there, feel free to reach out to me. Some of the things that we've accomplished over the last 10 years that I just kind of like to highlight: we have provided training for all of our employees through vendor consulting and also through the National Organization on Disability. We've developed resources for our people with disabilities, including an accommodations document that helps not only showcase the accommodations that we've provided, but be kind of a guide for people who are seeking accommodations to just kind of see what we've done and encourage them to come forward. We also have developed an etiquette guide, a disability etiquette guide to help people without disabilities understand how to interact in a comfortable manner. And most recently, we have compiled a mental health toolkit to help people who are having mental health issues find resources quickly and at their fingertips. Within the last 2 years, we have developed a mental health task force, which is a subset of our leaders business inclusion group. And we had a mental health summit this past May. We're going to have another one next May. And again, you're welcome. All are welcome. So that's it for me.
Great, thank you. Anat, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here, and it's great to see all of you. As as Lindsay said, I am a senior associate at the New York office of Baker Hostetler, and I focus primarily on complex commercial litigation in both state and federal courts. And most importantly for this panel, I was the co-founder of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Bar Association, a national nonprofit that caters to deaf, hard of hearing, late deafened attorneys, law students, judges, and any legal professional. And we work together to support and encourage each other, provide advice, educate each other, and just be a real source of resources. We have over 200 members, and if you think you qualify, please join us. I served as its president from 2014 through 2018, but you could tell I'm very proud of this nonprofit. And I also serve as a commissioner for the ABA's Commission on Disability Rights and as co-chair of the ABA's Business Law Section's Employment Litigation Subcommittee of the Business and Litigation Committee. And most recently, I just joined the ABA Business Law Section Executive Committee, newly formed Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Board. So I'm very excited to stay active and on these efforts to be inclusive as possible for our communities and everyone involved. And that's pretty much the gist of everything I do. Lindsay?
Thank you for keeping me honest. That's why I usually don't mute myself, because I tend to forget. Calandra, how about you?
Hi, my name is Calandra McCool, and I am a third-year associate at Big Fire Law and Policy Group. Our office is primarily located in Omaha, Nebraska, but we actually have attorneys all across the country. We are a new law firm that started up actually about 3 years ago, breaking off from from Fredericks Peoples and Morgan. And I specialize in particular in litigation. I've done a bunch of different things right now. I've done work in tribal, state, and federal court. Some of the more interesting projects I have the honor of working on have been some federal litigation against the Trump administration on behalf of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe to protect their checkpoints during the peak of last year with the COVID protection issues that came up ahead of the 2020 elections, as well as getting to do appellate work in tribal court. I've been involved in when I was a student, I was more involved in the National Native American Law Student Association. As an associate, I have been working a lot in the state of Nebraska with their bar association's Indian law section. I'm an outgoing vice president of that, but recently I've had to spend a lot of time passing bar exams. So as an early associate, now that I'm licensed in 3 states, we have a national practice. So we have quite a broad range of attorneys, getting to dig into a bunch more litigation and get more active with lovely opportunities such as this. And I look forward to doing more discussing disabilities. I'm autistic. And I also have some nerve damage issues, and I am also queer. So I love to look at the intersection between how to support attorneys with various kinds of difference, including people of color, as well as disabilities and other issues. So thank you for having me today.
Thanks, Calandra. And I think the key thing about the bar exams you mentioned is that you spend a lot of time passing bar exams. So congratulations. Well, I'm glad the stress is over. And finally, I introduced myself briefly at the beginning, but my name is Lindsey Callentine. I am the National Director of Legal Recruiting for Seyfarth Shaw, a firm based in Chicago, but with presence all over the world. I have been in the legal industry for my entire career. I won't tell you how many years because I don't want to date myself, but I've been working on the recruiting side of things for almost all of that time. I've spent some time in the HR space as well, but primarily in recruiting. And here at Cypher's, I'm on I'm a member of, I should say, our All Abilities Affinity group. I've spoke with Joanne and with others on a number of disability hiring related topics, and so always happy to participate and be part of the discussion. I've been very encouraged in the past, couple of years, and I know my firm has been great with this, but sort of recognizing, the impact of the work, of work and life and firms and legal organizations on individuals with disabilities, and an active effort to recruit more, certainly from my end, retain more from everybody else's end of things, and get involved in the conversation more, which is, I think, a great thing that we're seeing in the industry right now. So I will go ahead and get us started, and we thought it would be helpful to just kind of talk through, maybe something that might seem a little bit obvious, but, to set the baseline for the discussion for going forward. But, pose the question to the panelists: how has shifting to a remote work environment shifted your approach to your job, and really maybe more so how your law firm or legal organizations have operated and shifted completely, about 18, more than that, 20 months ago, I guess. I'm happy to get us started just because interviewing is kind of, a natural place to start. And, obviously I think one of the biggest shifts that we saw in legal recruiting was shifting to video interviews, which was not something, there was a time and a place where people said, there's no way and whatever, that we would ever hire somebody that we hadn't met in the office. And people were still saying that a year ago. And what's been interesting is that we have been able to do that. And we think that'll probably stay. And so I think that, some of the benefits that we found, there's no traveling or commuting stress of going to an interview, which can be particularly beneficial to people with disabilities because that's an added element of your day and an already stressful part of the process that you don't have to deal with. Obviously being able to operate over Zoom has made it much more accessible for everybody to be able to do video interviews. And so, we've learned a lot about Zoom, for instance, with having the closed captioning function, whereas some other programs don't have that built in. And so we learned as a firm that there are ways to sort of pivot quickly, and the products that you use for a lot of those things make a big difference. And maybe some of the things that'll come up, and I'll let the panelists come in, and I'm happy to pop in on some of these. But I think going forward, what we've seen recently and what I think we're going to continue to see is continuing to hire remote positions. And I know Calandra will have some thoughts on this. And the things that come along with that, such as bar licensure, which I think raises questions for a number of people. Where do you need to be barred, depending on where you're sitting? And so it's not a one-size-fits-all type of answer, but essentially you're looking, it's a whole new process that people may live in North Dakota, but they're practicing out of a Houston office of some organization. And so do they need to be barred in both? In that case, possibly yes, And so the whole unauthorized practice of law has taken on a whole entire, which is what it's called, when you're not barred where you should be, but it's taken on a whole new sort of meaning and look, and the ABA has done a lot of looking into that particular issue. And then another thing that I think will be interesting for us all to talk about is sort of onboarding and integration and how that's changed during this period of time, and sort of what changes need to happen as we continue being remote or hybrid in some cases. And so I want to put the question again, sort of, what's changed in your approach to your job, and what have you seen legal organizations do as a result of the changes of being forced into remote working, and sort of what may stick and what may go away. So Joanne, do you want to kick us off with some of your thoughts, and then we'll go to others?
Sure. In my opinion, there has been a whole paradigm shift in the industry as to the way we work and the way we collaborate. Prior to the pandemic, I think there was a lot of skepticism when people requested work at home arrangements. Are people really doing what they're supposed to be doing? And we have all proven over the course of the last 18 months that we can work at home and be very, very productive. So I do think that barrier is gone. And that is a barrier that's very helpful, I think, to a lot of people with disabilities. I also think that this is going to open the door for broader accommodations discussions going forward, not only physical disabilities, but also in the mental health space, because we've shined a real spotlight on mental health issues during the pandemic. So I think we finally have the door open and a lot of good things are coming down the road. You're on mute, Lindsay.
I'm just going to unmute myself again. Calandra, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so my law firm opened April 2019, and I was an early hire, and I was one of the last law associates that had to actually relocate to Nebraska because less than a year later, we had the shutdown. And it's actually ended up allowing us to evolve in a really creative way. Our law firm centers our tribal clients and benefiting our communities. Most of us, including myself, are tribal members or descendants. And one of the important things to the firm as an identity was always to do what we were doing for the benefit and protection of our communities. So now our model has shifted to where hiring wise, about half of us are full-time remote and spanning all the US time zones, some of us from Alaska to North Carolina. So we have attorneys all over the US, which works for us because since there are tribes all over the US, we have a national practice, even if we are generally located in one location. But the pandemic gave us a chance, and I know I discussed it a little bit with the partner I work most closely with. I think it was when we were working on some of those big federal litigations last summer, and it was clicking perfectly and we were just working on it all over Zoom or Teams. And we were able to still draft all these documents and collaborate. And building from that model, it's allowed us to recruit a lot more broadly, since as tribal members, for a lot of us, living closer to our communities matters a great deal more than some other factors. So this allows people to stay on their reservations or tribal areas and still do great work for Indian country with us here at Big Fire. So it's really allowed us to have a lot greater diversity of our recruitment. So it's been really wonderful.
Thanks. And Anat, I'm going to kind of turn it a little bit to you and sort of, ask a follow-up question, but sort of so I think there's been a lot of positives. What about working from home has been positive, but, what type of accommodations have you seen made during COVID that you think have benefited individuals with disabilities? And, what have you seen in your experience?
Sure. So, as noted before, people have requested these type of accommodations for years, the ability to work remotely, to have access to teleconferencing, video conferencing tool, and rely on flexible work schedule. And, these requests have been generally denied because, people think that, we've all had the idea that you have to be in person. We all know what you're doing. We want to see that you're productive. And in order to be productive, you need to be in the office. And, they would try to say that we can't justify the cost of these platforms just for one person, and or people were just afraid to ask for these kind of accommodations. And the pandemic has offered that opportunity a pandemic is never a good thing, but it offered people the opportunity to get these accommodations that they worked so hard to get and were denied. And, because employees were forced to adapt to the entire workforce in order to continue to be productive, in order to cater to all the client needs and create a virtual setting, since in-person work could not take place anymore. So this involved, investing in conferencing platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, everything that's out there, you know, offering flexible work schedule, extended paid leave. You know, I love the quote, necessity is the mother of invention. So like this pandemic has forced people to really think creatively and think outside of the box. How can we make this work? We want to be able to stay productive at the law firm, whatever entity you work for. We have to keep things going. And you know, for me personally, I am hard of hearing. So this setup that we have right now for this panel event has actually been really beneficial for me in terms of court hearings, in terms of mediation, depositions that I had over the last 2 years, and even just regular meetings with partners and my colleagues, because when you're hard of hearing, you need to be able to lip read, you need to be able to hear, you need to be able to take into so many things when you walk into a room. For me to walk into a conference room, I have to see, what is the setup? What is this? Is this a speaker event? Is this a conference? Is this just a regular meeting? Who's going to be speaking the most? Okay, I'm going to position myself in the room where I can see people the most, at least the people who are speaking the most, and make sure there's no background noise. You know, if the window's open, if there's something going on in the room, if there's 2 meetings in the same room, whatever it is, it's minimized. And with this kind of setup, I can see everyone very clearly. I can lip read. I don't have to worry who's going to speak, who's not speaking. We have captioning. You know, a lot of these platforms have automatic captioning. They don't have what we have today, a captioner, but something is better than nothing. I mean, we don't have a captioner at every meeting I go to. And so this has really given me the ability to be on the same level field and take away some of the stress that I have every time I walk into a room. Not to say I won't be able to do it. I've done it for 10 years. I've been practicing now for 10 years, and I've done it in my schooling and education and my extracurricular life. But it's really interesting to see how this kind of platform has really been helpful for me, because, you know, it's such a process for me. When I go to court, I have to ask for captioning. I have to make sure I'm, again, positioned in the right place. I have to ask the judge to wear a microphone, which I do, and I make it work, and I've made it work successfully. But these are things that have been very accommodating for me. For other people with disabilities who are in the wheelchair, obviously the lack of having to commute back and forth to work has been very, very beneficial. Not just a wheelchair. I know someone who has MS, and, you know, sometimes it could be very tiring, and you can have bad days, and you need to work remotely, and sometimes employees won't give you that flexibility. But because of the pandemic, they've been able to be productive because they're able to work when they're at the optimal level, where they have the most strength, as opposed to when they don't. And I can think of other examples, you know, like within the happy hour outside of work. You know, I know some people who had wheelchairs who couldn't go to some of these events. I've actually declined to go to some of these events because they're in loud environments, in loud bars, and I know I'm not going to be able to hear people. I'm just going to make a fool of myself, and sometimes I just say, I'm just going to stay at work and keep working, you know, because I'd rather not. And, you know, when we do these virtual happy hours, it's a little easier for me because I can have a glass of wine and hear everyone, and there's captioning and so forth. So these are just some examples of where, and, you know, you don't have to be disabled to have some benefit, because, you know, if you're I'm a parent, and a lot of people here are parents, and, you know, having that flexible schedule has been really helpful to spend more time with our family, especially when the children are home, and, you know, and doing virtual Zoom school. You know, we needed that flexibility to be able to take care of our families, and whether it's our children or our elderly family members.
So many good points. Joanne, you know, curious to hear your thoughts, and sort of, you know, being somebody on the front lines of human resources, if you've seen changes in requests for types of accommodations that you had not seen before that have sort of enlightened you to some other opportunities for accommodations. And now you're on mute.
Thanks. We actually have a wide breadth of accommodations already in place. I don't know that I have seen anything out of the ordinary, but I have seen that people are more willing to come forward and discuss issues like flexibility, issues like mental health, issues like, I like having a disability and wanting to work from their parents' house so that they can be in a state, in a city, to help look after their parents and have them help them manage their disability. So there have been a lot of different types of arrangements. And as I said, people are more willing to come forward. In terms of going forward, what will we do? I think we're all looking at that really hard right now. So for example, people want to move to different states. Okay, so what are the implications, again, from a bar perspective, but also just for any employee? Do we want people to be within driving distance of an office? Is that something we should think about or consider? Or is it just okay to be 100% remote? So I think all companies are kind of grappling with where we go from here. And I think it's going to evolve over time, but it's all been very positive.
Yeah, and that's, you bring up a good big question, sort of what is it, obviously, what does it look like going forward? And sort of, kind of on that topic and a bit of a follow-up to some of the Knott's points, but what accommodations should be preserved when we return to the workplace in terms of accessibility? So, we weren't necessarily having, on a more widespread level, captioning in various different forms available. As a just sort of matter of course in the past, and what changes and what should change. So Anat, I know you have some thoughts on this. Calandra, I know you do as well.
Sure, I'll go first if that's okay. So I see a lot of benefits to keeping some of this accommodations going forward, and there's something like a double-edged sword. Yes, I hope that we continue to have some meetings through Zoom, through whatever platform that your firm or company prefers, but that doesn't mean that automatic captioning should take the place of a qualified court transcription. Person is called CART, which is Communication Access Real-Time Captioning, and because auto caption is still a work in progress, and so companies should not be able to take the easy way out, or courts shouldn't say, oh, we're just going to use the auto caption, and or if someone's in the wheelchair and suddenly we all have to come back to work, and you realize now, even though they've been working remotely, your office is not accessible to them. It's not okay to tell them, okay, you can keep working from home and that's it. And no, because there's a lot as much as we've been able to be productive remotely, there is a lot to be lost if you're not in person with your work colleagues, and just in terms of building relationship, if you want to become a partner in the law firm, if you want to get promotion, you have to have that in-person connection to be able to be in person. And there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of hybrid meetings, in terms of some people being on Zoom and some people being in person. It just hasn't worked. I've actually had a court hearing where they tried to do something like that, where some people were in person, others, like co-defendants that weren't involved, were listening in, and it did not work very well. Some people were just kicked off, and so there's a lot of tech difficulties that still need to be worked out if this is something that we are going to continue. But we do have to consider those caveats where we can use these accommodations as a reason to keep people who have disabilities, I guess, in a reduced role when they shouldn't be, because that's not what we want. We want these employees with disabilities to be part of our workforce in the most optimal and integrated way possible.
Absolutely. And Calandra, I know you had some thoughts about the perspective around disability policies and accessibility policies, and happy to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so we're still in the process of crafting the policies for our law firm, but as far in particular, like as far as onboarding and maintaining like kind of a social atmosphere goes, I think we've actually been quite successful. We'll have like little get-togethers, and we've done various kinds of web connections. And then we have smaller practice group meetings and working. We've managed to do a lot of collaboration still, despite the distance. Hybrid meetings are rough. We have found that, I think generally speaking, even if some of us are in the Omaha or one of our other offices, it's still easiest if everybody's in their offices and like making an individual call instead of having and just participating entirely on the web platform instead of having people in a room. I think that's a kink that could be worked out, especially since like a lot of conferences have like those like Cisco voice over IP, like box speaker things that allow for a better conference call. So I feel like in the next year or so, there really should probably be some kind of merger of that technology. But yeah, so far we've hired people that were entirely remote, and we're allowing that like as a general policy going forward. But it hasn't impacted our ability to evolve as an organization so far that I could really see, other than generally for the most part positively. Some people working from home, we did have a couple of attorneys who don't like working from home as much, but that it's forced right now, so that just has to happen. But we've been able to build a social structure around it, but it is a trade-off to a little bit, but I found that it just requires a little bit more. I don't even really want to say it's more affirmative effort to reach out to each other, because you still had to like go down the hall and talk to each other. It's just now you're not forced to be in the same building, but you could still be in the same building and not take the time to make connection or not come out of your own space sometimes. So I've really seen it. It does require a little more forethought and planning, especially if I'm trying to get a hold of somebody. It's a couple of times I was back, but it's been really fruitful for us so far. And I would like to see all accommodations remain available going forward.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. And what you were bringing up reminded me, made me think a bit about a point I made towards the beginning to some degree, but it's important. And a number of the questions that have come in, I've been looking at them, even though we're going to answer them at the end, but just sort of seeing where they're going. But there's a lot of concern about sort of the ongoing hybridness of it, people working from home. Perhaps they want to, perhaps they need to. But one thing that we learned back in March of 2020, when we were in the midst of hiring people, and then all of a sudden, across our firm, we were not physically there, and so we had to jump really quickly into virtual onboarding, and it was, we were able to put it together and do it really well. And when everybody was remote, it was one thing, and then I think now, you have some people in, you have some people who aren't. And I think we've learned a lot of lessons about how to do some of that. And I think we learned a lot of good lessons about, how to collaborate across various different offices in an organization, if you have them, or, various other ways where we were making connections that people may not have made in a typical brick and mortar onboarding situation where they were getting to know those that were just around them. But I think the one thing that we're going to have to carry through is really being very thoughtful in terms of people that are brought into the organization and, how we're going to continue to foster the ability to make those interactions happen and for them to build relationships. It's one thing when you can walk down the hall and see people face to face, and there's that organic process of integrating yourself into a new organization just by sort of physically being there. And that may not necessarily be the case anymore. Maybe, no one's going to physically be there. Or like I said, it's a bit of a hybrid situation. But I think from the organizational side of things, organizations really need to be really proactive in sort of setting up integration plans for all employees, kind of not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, but a one-size-fits-all in terms of everybody sort of sticking to the same ideas. And, there's going to need to be more monitoring from the whoever it falls under, whether it's HR or recruiting or talent development, or it's the office administrator who is doing all of those functions, making sure that there's sort of a prolonged, drawn-out plan and lots of check-ins and things that are happening, and somebody who can make sure all of that's happening. Because I think one of the things that, we'll see how it bears out, but I think is a concern is what will our, turnover rates look like in a year and a half or two for all the folks that we hired during this fully remote period of time. It was one thing when you hired somebody at the very beginning of it, because we were all in the same boat of like, what is this world and what's going on? And we're all stuck at home. But, as things evolve and the world is changing, some folks may be left behind. And so I think it's up to an organization to really do everything that they can possibly do to not leave anybody behind. And I think that that's important, generally speaking, but I think that's especially important when we're talking about our employees with disabilities and people with disabilities who, may have a different set of accommodations and may be home, working from home or working remotely or doing a hybrid schedule for a reason other than that's, sort of the convenient thing for them or something like that. There may be other reasons. And so, I think we have to be very mindful of just being really, 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 and of course the word is failing me, but thoughtful is one word that comes to mind about how we're integrating employees, and not just beyond the first day or the first week, but, throughout their first year, and what are our touch points and how are we staying in touch and how are we helping them foster relationships with people at the organization that, would be the people they'd see in the hallway and may not be as well. And so, Anat, you had added in when we were talking as a group and sort of our notes, a question that's kind of and I think it's a good time to talk about it before we move into the questions that are sort of, okay, what do we see going forward, and we're transitioning back and what's going to happen next. But, and it seems like a basic question, and I'm sure everyone on this call is like, duh, but I think it's good to talk about it and use words and speak about it out loud, because not every organization is where we want them to be with this. So what is the business case? So we're talking about all of these different types of accommodations and things, that we're working on doing, and we're trying to keep in process and keep in organizations. And what's the business case for employing individuals with disabilities and providing these accommodations more so? So what is the reason for you, if you're somebody that's on the administrative side, to continue to push for these accommodations? And I think we'll see new and differing ones and evolving ones. And, whose responsibility is it to stay up to date on those types of things, and whose responsibility does it end up being financially, or various other things, the employer and the employee? And, I know, Anat, you had some initial thoughts on this that I'm happy to have you weigh in on, and Joanne, Calandra also, please, feel free.
Sure. I think it's so important to have a diverse workforce, no matter what, whether you're a different color, different religion, because when you have different perspectives coming in, you get different ideas and you are not constrained to one train of thought. And I just feel that it's important not just to have a diverse workforce, but we often forget that diversity should also be inclusive of people with disabilities. I often feel that employees with disabilities are the last and most silent minority that are often left out of these kind of discussions as to what would make our workforce better. And why do we want people with disabilities? Because I personally feel that people who have disabilities are able to think outside the box, because, when you're faced with the obstacle, and a huge obstacle I face is my hearing disability. Okay, I can't do X, so how do I make it work so I could do Y, Z, A, B, C in the different way, and maybe even a more effective way than we were doing it before? And so I've always had to have that kind of mindset growing up, in terms of school, in terms of learning where should I sit, how do I make sure I'm getting the things I need to get done, and I never let anything stop me. So I feel like these are a lot of transferable skill sets that work in our workforce, because we are faced with obstacles every day. There's legal disputes that come up, challenges that come up, and I feel like we are able to tackle it because we're able to say, sure, that's the way we've always done it, but let's come about it a different way. Sure, we've always looked at it in terms of a circle. Let's look at it in terms of a triangle or a square. Maybe that will work better. Maybe we can find a creative solution. And I just feel like those are internal benefits to your workforce. And I'm also noticing in my workplace, in terms of clients, they are also recognizing the benefit that employees with disabilities bring to the discussion and to legal strategizing. And when they're asking for diverse staffing, they want people with disabilities to be included because they think they can offer unique perspective and be very productive in ways that others may not. And so it offers clients diverse perspective from people. So we are problem solvers every day of our lives. Every day I'm exposed to challenges and I have to maneuver around my disability. And I think that's a valuable skill set that clients want, that employers should want. And so those are things that we should take up into consideration when we're considering to hire anyone with a disability. I can tell you from my own personal experience, and I see in some of the Q&A that there are some people who are concerned, how do I request a reasonable accommodation? How do I go about doing that? Especially when we go back to work, if I've been working remote, if I start asking for accommodation, are they going to give it to me? It's going to be expensive. First of all, I can tell you, I want to dispel the myth that making these accommodations are expensive. Most of these accommodation requests do not cost the employer any money. They already have it set up. Whether, I requested, a way to communicate. I wanted a caption phone, and that's actually provided for free by the federal government. I wanted to be able to communicate with people, not just by the phone. My firm already has an instant messaging system set up, and a lot of accommodations that do cost money are tax deductible to the employer. So you shouldn't go into it hesitant to ask. You may not get everything that you want, but you should ask, and you'd be surprised presently. But I can tell you, when I was interviewing for a law firm job, I didn't even know whether I should disclose I have a disability because I was worried that my employer would view that as a negative. And I did. And unfortunately, there are some people who are not educated and that they do view your disability as a negative, or they don't want to deal with it. And so, but that was my main thought. That was my internal, handicap in a way. And I handicapped myself even further by having those kind of thoughts. And I could tell you, when I interviewed at Baker, I didn't mention I have a hearing disability. And my thought process was, if I can hear them, if I can understand every question, I'm not going to mention I'm hard of hearing. Otherwise, if I couldn't understand them, I said, by the way, I'm hard of hearing. I wear a hearing aid. I may ask you to repeat the question, just so you know. I didn't ignore you and move on quickly. Okay, now we got that out of the way. But I didn't mention it. But one of my interviewers, I later learned that after he left the room with the other partner, he said, because I have a deaf accent, some people write it off as a New York accent, whatever. I'm from New York, so that's fine with me. But he said to the other partner, he said, I think Anna has a hearing disability. And if that's true, that actually makes her resume far more impressive and makes me want me to bring her back in for another round. And when he told me this story, like 6-8 months after I was hired, I was blown away because I had gone through this whole interview process so stressed and so agonizing over whether to even disclose my disability. And here were two people who were looking at it as a positive, as something I should have been upfront about, that I should have been more vocal about. And of course, not everyone's going to be like that, but those are the type of employers you should be wanting to work for anyway. And it's just a perspective change that a lot of people need to have sometimes. And to talk about this is a real benefit for the workforce.
That's a great story. Calandra or Joanne, is there anything, I think that probably it's hard to make a better case than Anat just did, but obviously, organizations are looking to increase diversity. That's nothing new, but I think, and I said at the very beginning, we're starting to see a little bit of encouragement in terms of what organizations consider diverse, and disability has really become much more front of mind in the past year. And I think, to Joanne's point, a big helper of that was mental health awareness. And I think people being much more forthcoming over the past 18 months about their mental health disabilities. And so I think that it's starting to become a little bit more institutionalized. I mean, the benefits are clearly there. There's also client benefits. Clients are asking for their cases. They've always been asking for cases to be diversely staffed, but they're expanding their definition of diversity. And I think legal organizations, if they haven't already sort of redefined what diversity means to them, now's a good time to do it. And so sort of last topic for us before we look at some of the questions, but a number of people have been hired, obviously, during this period of time while things were all, wacky in the world. And so I think it's important for organizations to think about, okay, as we're going to start recalling employees into our places of work, what is it that we might need to think about from this angle that we hadn't thought about in the past because there wasn't necessarily a need, or because we knew about what accommodations somebody needed in an office up front because they had asked us during the offer or interview process. And so, what are some of the things that organizations should be taking a look at? And, some quick things that come to mind, and I know Joanne has some thoughts on this, but, are your buildings or is your location accessible? Perhaps you hired somebody who uses a wheelchair during the pandemic period of time and they've been working remotely. And it probably maybe hasn't been top of your mind to make your building accessible or provide, ways for that person to get to the office if that's going to be sort of what you're hoping they do. And so think about that. Many of us are lucky to work in big, buildings that have to be ADA accessible by code, but not all of us do. And, sort of think about what accommodations that were made during the work environment for individuals with disabilities may be different when they come into the office, and find a mechanism of being open to putting that question out there to employees to say, as we return to the office, we know the office may look different, you may have been using something at home. And I'm not saying just put that out to people who've requested accommodations in the past, just somehow find a way to make that known to your whole organization. What has changed in your work life that as you come back into the office can make things easier for you. And Joanne, I know you have some thoughts to add to that, and I'm sure Calandra and Anat have some thoughts as well, but please.
Well, first I want to go back to what Anat said and just applaud her because that was the best business case ever. And I just want to add that there are so many talented people out there with disabilities that employers can't afford to overlook this incredible pool of talent. It is hard enough to attract and retain individuals. Why make it harder for them to do the work? So that's one thing first and foremost, I think. Also, this is a great opportunity for us to take a look at some of our policies that may have erected unnecessary barriers and see, what can we really change? There's a lot of junk out there that was how we always did it. And this is a great opportunity to expand accommodations and to just think differently in how we work and collaborate. I also think we can't lose sight, again, of the mental health impact of people returning, people with disabilities and without disabilities. And so transition periods, I think, are important so that you have time to be flexible, get yourself acclimated to what the next new normal is, because we all just kind of, boom, went out. But now we should be able to have a more thoughtful return, I think. And I think it's really important for companies to communicate often, communicate whatever they can, even if it's to say, we're not sure, what the next step is, but, just even if it's, we don't have news, just keep communicating with people. Be open to, as you said, asking people if there's anything they need as they return, any accommodations, what we can do to make their work lives easier.
And Joanne, this is a question that had come into the chat, but I think is timely for right now. So, and I don't know that we can answer some of these questions directly for individuals, but in terms of from an organizational perspective, there are, a number of questions about how does a person with a disability, work with their employer in regard to disability-related absences. And so oftentimes these are not necessarily planned absences. They may not be for a full day. I mean, what do organizations need to do to really sort of be able to address, whereas when working remotely, it was a lot easier probably to do that, where now if you're at the office and you have to leave and it's not a telemedicine or something along those lines, how should employers be looking at their leave, I'm not talking about leave of absence, but, paid time off or whatever it is, policies.
Well, I just think flexibility is the key. Everyone needs to be flexible. I know as a parent of a child with disability, there are oftentimes I'll walk into work and the receptionist would say, you got to leave. And you know what? That's what I had to do. So you just need to work with your employer. If you are a good employee and you're delivering, I think they will be very understanding. Talk to your HR department, talk to your practice group leader, make sure that they know what you're dealing with. And, you're still delivering your work at the end of the day, so it shouldn't matter.
I would agree, although, and I'm going to pose this one to Calandra and Anat, another question from the chat. And this is interesting. This one just came in. So for clients and work that has to be addressed in person, maybe that's because the client specifically says so, maybe it's, for another reason. But for clients and work that have to be addressed in person, possibly because a person cannot be fully accommodated remotely, what steps are you taking to do that work, serve those clients? And Calandra, and you obviously are a nearly fully remote firm, and so I think you have probably your own ideas in dealing with this. And Anat, I'm just curious, from a client service perspective, and you as an attorney, with clients that make demands, what are your thoughts on both of these? So Calandra, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. Yeah, even when we weren't fully remote, we do a decent amount of work that does have to be in person. Like we're attending tribal council meetings. I personally, even through the pandemic, assisted we provide some election services. So I assisted one of our clients that uses us as a third party election attorney. And I had to go to we ended up having 3 elections, and our practice also, and with the remoteness of tribes, and frequently, so they have wildly varying budgets, but a lot of the time it's still a lot more feasible for them to pay for one of us to come visit, or 2 or 3, than for all of them to come to us. And a lot of the time, also that kind of work needs to be there. They can't move the whole tribe to do the election wherever I am. And it's never been an issue. Whatever accommodation we needed in order to get there just was what we did, because it's just part of our client model is to provide the best community-based services possible. So that frequently does mean going to the community, even if it means taking a small plane in Newtown, North Dakota, or driving wherever. We've ended up doing it. That's just part of the nature of Indian law practice. So it's been really, it still worked even during the pandemic. We cut back a lot of it, and a lot of tribes were really pandemically minded. So a lot of it was remote, but there have been a few things such as elections that have still had to go. And we've managed to provide those services safely and effectively.
From my perspective, before the pandemic, because my hearing disability, I can still talk to people. I actually preferred in-person meetings with clients than over the phone, because I don't use captioning for regular team meetings or client meetings, because when it's one-on-one or 1 or 2 people, it's very easy for me to control that environment wherever it is, in the conference room. And I usually use accommodations for court mediation, depositions, anything that has to be on the record. And when we do phone conferencing, I usually just use my own captioning. There's the caption phone I used to have, or there's third-party captioning services that I use. But because those are just informal conversations, and I wouldn't otherwise have a captioner for those kind of conversations, I never had it. Other people may have different levels of this. That's another thing I want to bring up. A good point I really want to bring up is that not every disability is the same. My hearing disability is not the same as someone else's hearing disability. I know people who are hard of hearing that rely on sign language primarily and will need interpreters, and they should get that accommodation. There are other people who So there's never one size fits all. What works for me will not work for another person with disability. And I think that's something that really needs to be amplified for employers and employees alike. And you should not feel that because I didn't ask for something, it's not something that you need. If you need something, you ask for it. If you are primarily a sign language communicator, that's what you need, and that's what you should be getting. And but during the pandemic, obviously, with people wearing masks, it takes away a primary form of communication for me, which is lip reading. And people can still speak clearly with the mask, but it's much harder. And people will wear a clear mask, and that helps. But it can get foggy, and it really depends on the clear mask. So the whole thing. We did have one witness that was very nervous about participating in the upcoming trial. And as much as we tried to do it through online Zoom, she really wanted to meet in person. So we did make that accommodation to meet with her in person. But again, we're all wearing masks, and I asked her to wear a clear mask. And we made it work the best we could, although not ideal.
That's great. And I think if there's anything we can all take away from the knot, it's, really to embolden yourself. And I imagine most people don't necessarily have that confidence naturally, but I think the points that she's making are really good, that, you're not asking for favors. You're not asking for special treatment. You're asking to have the same playing field that all of your colleagues have. And that is 100% reasonable. And that goes for people with disabilities, people without disabilities. There are elements to that and everything. And so the last question we got, which is probably sort of a good way to close it, and I'll share my thoughts, and then if anybody else has additional thoughts, but I thought it sort of was a good wrapping up thing. It's talking about when looking for employment opportunities, and I think this can apply to just when looking at, employment opportunities or your organization or whatever. What are the key things to look for when interviewing for jobs to know that a firm is a good fit? The question says, for example, if one has multiple disabilities, how is it best to emphasize strengths when one is seen with multiple disabilities? I think Anat gave you a really good answer to that second part of that question earlier, in that, you are somebody who by nature thinks outside of the box, and you are someone who by nature finds solutions to problems, and, is used to fixing things and adapting. And I think that is something that the legal industry is certainly looking for. But what I would say is what to look for. When you're interviewing with an organization, I've always said, a website is a great place to get, basic information about practice and who you're meeting, but read the fine print on the websites too. Make sure that, they have statements regarding their desire to recruit people with diverse backgrounds, and read what their idea of diverse is. If the word disability is not in there, that's a good indicator. Look to see if anywhere on their careers page they talk about if you need an accommodation during the interview process. If they don't, then that's not really top of mind in the organization. In the interview process, are you being asked, as a matter of course for anybody who has to interview, or is there anything accommodations you need during the interview process? So I think it's just really kind of looking at some of the nuanced stuff, and if it feels that it's, whether it's a feeling or you can see on a website or something that organization is devoid of sort of that thinking, I think it's a good way to understand that may not be the right place for you. And so you'd be surprised at the number of organizations, and I go around and I look at job listings all the time to see if anybody's doing it better than we are and what I can steal. And it's surprising the information that you see just by looking at another organization's website or whatever that's pretty telling about sort of their thoughts on inclusivity and diversity. And so I'd say just, pay close attention to that information. We are at the end. We have 1 minute left. I don't know if anybody on the panel has 30 seconds they want to share, or if we feel that we've wrapped it up decently. I don't see any unmutes. So, well, thank you all very much for attending this free webinar. I've just lost my small script on we want to thank everybody who participated, our esteemed panelists here. I'm not including myself in the esteem, but you guys, the three of you, are doing really great critical work, and it was an honor to be able to moderate and get your thoughts on all of these important topics, and for you to share some time out of your schedule with us. And so this program has been recorded. Information will be disseminated. And a reminder, the section of Civil Rights and Social Justice provides free webinars and resources for legal professionals and advocates nationwide. We hope that this helps you in your work. And, again, if you can, please consider joining and becoming active in the ABA. You can learn all about that, as well as other programs and resources and initiatives at it's just been too much. ABA Bar, American Bar, ambar.org/CRSJ. So best of luck in your work. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon.